Many people think of security as compliance. And I can tell you, you can be fully compliant and totally insecure because we're checking all the boxes on paper, but then you look at what's running in the system and the runtime drifted miles away from the paper.
Hi, you're listening to The Secure Developer. It's part of the DevSecOps community, a platform for developers, operators, and security people to share their views and practices on DevSecOps, Dev and Sec collaboration, cloud security, and more. Check out devsecon.com to join the community and find other great resources. This podcast is sponsored by Snyk. Snyk is a dev-first security company, helping companies fix vulnerabilities in their open source components and containers without slowing down development. To learn more, visit snyk.io. SNYK.io. Welcome back to The Secure Developer. On today's episode, Guy Podjarny, president and founder of Snyk, is joined by Nicolas Chaillan. Nicolas is the Air Force's first chief software officer and responsible for enabling Air Force programs in the transition from Agile to DevSecOps to establish Force-wide DevSecOps capabilities and best practices, including continuous authority to operate processes and faster streamline technology adoption. In addition to his public service, he is a technology entrepreneur, software developer, cyber expert, and inventor. He has founded 12 companies and is recognized as one of France's youngest entrepreneurs. He has also created and sold over 180 innovation software products to 45 Fortune 500 companies. We hope you enjoy their conversation, and don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes if you enjoyed today's episode.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning back in. Today, we're going to talk about security and DevSecOps at a very large scale and in a security-conscious surrounding. We have the pleasure of having with us Nicolas Chaillan, who is the Chief Software Officer for the U.S. Air Force and is really the force behind the DoD's DevSecOps motion. Nicolas, thanks for coming on to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, Nicolas, before we dig in, beyond my sort of one-liner introduction there, can you tell us a little bit about what you do and just a bit about the journey that got you here?
Yeah, so obviously you can tell with my accent that I was not born in the U.S., which is interesting. I was obviously born in France, in Marseille, and I moved to the U.S. about 11 years ago. I'm an entrepreneur. I created 12 companies, and I built software, cyber products, and a lot of great innovations. Worked with a ton of great Fortune 500, helping them move to touch tables and a lot of innovative technologies. And that's been very exciting for me to build innovation around payments, around cyber, you name it. We've done a lot of different things over 20 years. I created my first company back in France. I was 15. I'm 36 now. So I've been doing this stuff for a little bit of time. And what's interesting is I wanted to make a difference. And after starting my 11th company at the time, I started at DHS right when there was a lot of terrorist attacks, particularly in France and Paris. Remember in the theater, the big attacks. Yeah. And I wanted to try to see, okay, what could we do to make a difference? And I started as a chief architect at DHS and then moved to DoD. And we created the DoD Enterprise DevSecOps initiative you talked about, which is really helping the DoD move to the pace of relevance and to continuous delivery of capabilities using DevSecOps. And then we wanted to find a home for that program to scale across the department. So my boss at the time, Dr. Roper, created this concept of the chief software officer. And funny enough, the title, I was not a fan of it because it doesn't exist on the commercial side. And I really wanted to bring the commercial best practices into the DoD. And I wanted to stick to naming conventions and everything that's being done on the commercial side. But I came to realize that maybe for once we were leading the pack and maybe it was a new title that maybe every organization would need, which is about empowering the software teams to move fast while having that baked-in security into their software lifecycle processes. And, when you look at things like the adoption of containers and Kubernetes and all this complex technologies around abstraction of cloud and elasticity, being agnostic across edge to IoT to cloud to jets, bombers, for space systems, you name it, and the complexity of all that tied to DevOps, DevSecOps, culture. I mean, it kind of sounds like a full-time job, doesn't it?
sounds like you're not bored. How do you find, I'm curious, sort of chief software officer as compared to like chief technology officer, probably like a slightly more common title in the industry?
Yeah, I guess the CSO is more focused on the software components of the CTO. And so effectively it's a subset, but a more precise set of capabilities. And I see it as bringing enterprise services around the software stack to make it able to move at the pace of relevance. And there's a few things we built, right? The Cloud Office, we created Cloud One, which is our Amazon and Azure Cloud Office, all the way to the classified clouds. And then we created Platform One, which is our DevSecOps team to bring a CI/CD pipeline with Kubernetes, our continuous monitoring stack, zero trust, baked-in security, behavioral detection, all this technology day one to teams that just want to focus on building mission software and not have to build all these layers. And so effectively, the CSO office is responsible for bringing to life these enterprise services. One of the foundational aspects of good teams, obviously, beside the culture and the tech, is about continuous learning. And I really believe continuous learning is going to be the difference between teams that are able to keep up or just get behind. And it has to be a self-learning, empowered through AI or technology, because the pace of what we have to learn is changing so fast that we can't just rely on train the trainer or the teacher to train the people and do a once every 5-year certification is world-class. And so that continuous learning piece where we have to train 100,000 people this year, for example, and that's just 1 year, that tells you the kind of scale we're getting into when you look at moving some of the big DoD programs like F-35, all of nuclear arsenal, space systems to Kubernetes and containers and DevSecOps and be able to release multiple times a day. That's the difference between getting behind or leading and potentially winning the next war. And so effectively, timeliness is the key to success, but with that baked-in security so you don't move fast and creating more risk. And of course, when you have the mission we have, we can't afford to mess up. We can fail, right? But we have to define what failing means. It has to be small and incremental, tiny failures, not big events. So it tells you fail fast, don't fail twice for the same reason, and move fast.
Yeah, and that's I'm going to drill into that topic a bit more because I think this notion of fail fast, DoD context is indeed not as easily digestible. It sounds indeed like a big and impactful role, and probably more akin to platform teams, but at a larger scale, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Hence the title for it. So on that topic, you and your team have written, I have in front of me, illustrious document here, 79 pages, I think, of the DevSecOps motion, right? It's titled the DoD Enterprise DevSecOps Reference Design. I'm not 100% sure I have the latest document, but I think I have August 2019. It is rich with a lot of statements here. And if you'd be up for it, let's kind of go through and I have some highlights there. And maybe we drill down into the meaning behind statements that are well crafted into the doc. Shall we do it?
Yeah, let's do it.
The first thing, as you start reading through the document, the thing that really caught my eye first is you have a section there that says the benefits of adopting DevSecOps include, and the very first bullet says, reduced mean time to production, the average time it takes from when new software features are required until they are running in production. I loved that sort of initial quote because, and maybe this is my security lens on things, but when we say DevSecOps, this is a true internalization of the DevOps need. Like that line is oftentimes what you see at the top of a DevOps, but not so much a DevSecOps element. And only your third bullet in the 4 that you have here says fully automated risk characterization, monitoring, and mitigation across the application lifecycle. Are these bullets meant to prioritize? How do you view the balance between the need to reduce mean time to production and this controlling risk or automating risk characterization, handling risk correctly? How do you see the balance of those in this motion?
Yeah, I think that's why it's so interesting to look at the DORA metrics as a cohesive set of metrics. I think if you start just tracking one versus the other, you get to put yourself at risk because you're going to try to optimize one at the detriment of the other. And obviously that doesn't work. They are all important, and I would probably argue equally important. And if you improve one at the expense of the other, you're not improving anything. And so, when I look at some of the numbers we're seeing with 106 times faster lead time from dev to prod, 208 times more frequent code deployments, 7 times less change failure rate, 22% less time unplanned work or rework. And the most mind-boggling one that's going to speak to you more is the 2,600 times faster recovery. That's pretty mind-boggling. And if that wasn't enough, the 2.2 times employees are more likely to recommend the organization, so retain and attract talent too, right? And I think they all matter. Obviously, for us, that failure, that's why defining the word fail, right? A nuclear explosion is unacceptable, right? I think it's pretty obvious.
Got to draw a line.
Right? So you probably want to put the line a little bit way past that, right? But at the same time, it has to be small incremental change. And I think that's what people don't understand. When I started saying in DoD, hey, fail fast, but don't fail twice for the same reason and learn fast, people look at me like I was crazy because they assume fail fast meant like waste an entire program funding. And you look at F-35, it's a $1.2 or $1.2 trillion budget. Go beat that, right? We're the largest organization on the planet with the largest budgets on the planet. Can't compare with anything That's just one program, right? That's just one of my many teams. So if you think back, you realize pretty quickly, fail fast has to be small, incremental, tiny change. Otherwise, you're wasting a lot of money and potentially putting a lot of people at risk, particularly when you touch weapon systems, which obviously makes everything easier.
Yeah. Well, that's that sounds like wise words here, and I especially liked the comment on the sort of the nuclear explosion not being an acceptable failure. You have to gauge those as well. But I guess if I push back a bit on that point, which I totally relate to, I agree that you have to embrace a sense of failure and you have to prioritize agility, in shipping things as well as recovering from problems you've identified. How do you communicate to the teams who are presumably very, very security aware? How do you communicate to them when to be willing to accept risk? How do you suggest they draw the line? If clearly nuclear explosion is kind of past it, but how do they define what's within?
Well, I think we have to define security. Unfortunately, in DoD, many people think of security as compliance. And I can tell you can be fully compliant and totally insecure. That's a big concern I have because we're checking all the boxes on paper, but then you look at what's running in the system and the runtime drifted miles away from the paper. And so effectively your paper is worthless and you're compliant with a fake stack that's not even the one that's actually running. And then security also means for us, we have operational security, physical security versus, of course, cyber security, which creates a whole set of different problems. So it's all about first understanding security and the risk. And back to your point is, how do you accept risk? Well, first you have to understand it, right? And the issue is often we don't understand the risk. I mean, you look at a container, you're going to have new CVEs. I'm the one ultimately that approves the containers on Iron Bank, which is our hardened container repo, where we have 350 products centrally assessed and hardened. And we open source all of that, by the way, which is pretty exciting for DoD. We even open source all of the Kubernetes and hardening and Flash.js code and Terraform scripts, and everything is open source on Repo 1. So that's pretty rare. I don't think we had such a massive engagement with the industry and open source communities before. But you look at the CVs of some of these containers, and you have big companies that not going to give names today, but they're going to recognize themselves, massively used, huge, tremendous publicly traded companies with 2,400 CVEs on their containers. And then it had to take us to say, look, if you don't fix it, we're not going to use your product anymore, for them to start fixing it. And some are doing a very good job and some are not doing a good job. Some cyber companies actually tell us, well, there's a lot of CVEs. We don't want to take the time to justify why these are acceptable or not. So we're just not going to do it, right? That's mind-boggling for a cyber company. And often it's dependencies of dependencies and you inherited that risk. But when you're shipping software, you ship the entire piece of software regardless of who you decided to use as a dependency. and you're responsible for that dependency and to update it. People just have these dependencies that are 12, 14 years stale because they don't update it because it's not their software. That's wrong. It's your software, right? You're shipping it. And so it's back to understanding risk. And honestly, many times we see vendors saying, well, that's not applicable because we don't use this, or it's not something that can be accessed. You don't know what a bad actor is going to be able to do if he gets a foothold in one of the container. And if you have 1,200 of them, you don't know how they could be used as a joint capability to get into the system and escalate privileges or laterally move, or who knows if one could be used with the other. There's no way someone can make the argument that they actually know it's mitigated. So it's back to understanding risk. And if you talk to some of these CISOs and this publicly traded company, which I do, in a very nice way, asking for them to fix their 1,200 CVEs or whatever, they start to understand, wait, even more after SolarWinds, we have to address this and we can't just accept that risk. So it's risk we accepted for years. You have these products being used by the largest organization on the planet. It took DoD to make them wake up.
And so you define, you sort of go through, and I know the document you actually kind of map out specific types of technologies, but it sounds like you're still drawing a high bar in terms of what you consider legitimately secure. You're talking about these CVEs, you want to understand risk. When you talk about empowerment and you talk about different teams operating and running kind of at their own pace, right? A lot of the concept or the principles behind DevOps or DevSecOps are about making them independent, allowing them to run fast. How do you define which decisions can the teams building the applications be allowed to do versus which ones move up to indeed someone who might be more proficient at assessing risk and making that call?
We put the bar pretty high when it comes to our cybersecurity posture of our DevSecOps pipelines. I would probably argue, and I might be biased, but it's probably one of the most advanced. And I talk to healthcare, financial institutions, retailers, and a lot of people are coming to use our source code because I'm probably not biased, or maybe I'm right. But we put the bar pretty high with zero trust, moving target defense, behavior detection. Because look, all these scanning technologies, and we use multiple scanners because, in fact, we find a lot of disparity between scan results. You're not going to see the same results between scanners, which is already a problem. So they don't even agree with each other. A lot of false positives, a lot of false negatives, by the way, too, that people forget about. So we use multiple scanners, which complexifies the problem, by the way. And there's so much you can do with scanning because, look, there's 0 days and there's stuff that's going to come out that no one knows. And it's dependencies of dependencies. It could be a lot of different things. It could be malicious code in nature. Look at SolarWinds. It's not bad code. It's malicious code in nature, signed code by the company. So how do you know it's malicious? Well, you can't find many scanners or any scanners that can do a good job at detecting malicious code, like a time bomb or opening ports, filling data. So at the end of the day, it comes down to detection, rapid detection, and reducing the attack surface. So one is zero trust. So container A can only talk to B if it's whitelisted, reducing that attack surface lateral movement, right? Behavior detection, looking at what the container is doing. If it's doing new things, that we prevent that and we kill the container, go back to immutable state. GitOps, everything is in Git. We don't make change in production, so everything is enforced in Git. Right. And then finally, the continuous monitoring, alerting capability where we push all the logs and telemetry to a central place to be alerted and all that. So it's behavioral zero trust and all that combined that reduce your cyber risk. Now, back to your question on how do you define who does what? Well, we provide, as part of our central hardening of containers, hardened containers of base images for 16 programming languages, 23 databases, tons of commercial products, open source libraries. So we centrally update and assess and work with the vendors and open source communities to have the latest versions as soon as possible, even sometimes before they release. So it's on repo, it's on Iron Bank, so people can consume these bits. And then we centrally harden the OS. We do all that work for each programming language. And so effectively, that's inherited by the teams. Now, each team can then use that as a base image to build their container to do something additional. And that delta is going to be scanned the same way, but they have much less findings unless they bring a lot of bad dependencies. So effectively, we try to centralize that central assessment and have very little delta if we look at the NIST cybersecurity framework, 153 controls, we do 90% of them at the platform or infrastructure layer, and only 10% is left at the application team layer. So much more streamlined, and that's how we can move faster.
Yeah, it sounds great. So that sounds very much like the Netflix paved road model, right? Where you define best practices, but you make them easy. Which gets me. I have another quote that I liked. There are many quotes I liked in the in the document, but I'll read one more piece. Which is, you say there is no uniform DevSecOps practice. Each DoD organization needs to tailor its culture and its DevSecOps practices to its own unique processes, products, security requirements, and procedures. And embracing DevSecOps requires organizations to shift their culture, evolve existing processes, and adopt new technologies and strengthen governance. So the things I liked about it, there's no uniform practices. You need to tailor it to your specific surrounding, and it requires a culture shift in this process, which I relate to very much. When you balance this, so the conversation we just had, you build this great technology, you make it easy to be secure on one front. How do you balance the flexibility that the organizations get? Do you have central governance on your end where you, I guess, govern them and assure it? Does that get sort of disseminated to the different parts of the DoD? What do you find works?
Yeah, I think it's a tough balance, right? Because DoD first is huge. You can compare it to a normal company, right? We're just too big. 4 million people. I mean, the budget is $800 billion a year. It's just too big to compare with any other organization. So effectively, having a one-size-fits-all is probably not a good idea. Now, there is still a need to have enterprise services that can be adopted with diversity. Now, if you think that it does make sense to have a central options like identity management, single sign-on, some of the zero trust stacks, if you want to do east-west traffic, ingress, north-south traffic, you can't have a bunch of disparate technologies. It's going to create issues to integrate. That's why Platform One brings a lot of these enterprise services, collaboration tools, chats. Why do we need 20 of those? Probably not. Do you want to go on different chats to find which team is there and go another one to find out the other team? It's just not efficient, right? So the quote is mostly right. You need diversity. And that's how we do it also with Platform One. Like I said, 16 programming languages, 23 databases. We're not saying, hey, use Java, use Python, use whatever. We give options, right? That's the key. There are things you can give a lot of options. There are things you should give a few options, and there are things that maybe you don't give options, right? So it's a tough balance. But even just the Air Force is as big as the normal, I guess, Fortune 5. So it does make sense to think of it this way and cut it sometimes in pieces. But then we have issues integrating services and APIs and things across Air Force, Navy, and Army, and so on. It's a tough balance. I don't think there's an easy answer. And honestly, DoD number one impediment is the silos that we have for everything. And it creates this little kingdoms/egos fields. And it is difficult, right, to please everybody and get everybody excited at the same pace and on the same page. But if you don't break these silos, right, if you have different teams doing testing, cyber, and then, by the way, that's per program. So you're talking, how do you connect F-16, 22, 35, and so on. That's why we're having so much work to do. And by the way, you have multiple classification levels. Think of how complex it would be if your network was air-gapped in multiple different times and ways, because you have different classification levels and they can talk to each other. And by the way, you need the same stack to run with no drift, so you don't have different disparity of technology across dozens of these environments. That's where GitOps, is foundational, so you have no drift. It's tough to do this and find the talent, by the way. If you were to do this separately for the Air Force and Navy, the Army, how do you find even the talent? I mean, most companies can't even find a talent, period, let alone 3, 4, 5, 10 times. So there is a point where, okay, maybe we need to bring enterprise services and bring diversity of options within them, like multiple clouds, multiple scanning cyber products, whatever, right? But then few of them should really just have one option.
Yeah, it sounds like, if I echo this back, it sounds like it's really about making it easy. You're providing a valuable,
right.
Again, very, very aligned to that sort of paved road concept, which is there's all these things, you're specifying what they should be doing, at a more high level. There are security requirements, not just you. There's a myriad of other requirements coming on each of these departments, each of these parts, and you're helping them out. You're providing them with a platform that helps them achieve all of that, and in the process, sets them straight or puts them on a certain path that helps you also achieve a certain consistency in the security controls and the operational excellence that applies throughout the organization, despite its size, or maybe not throughout the whole thing, but rather enough of them because they've opted into that platform. Does that sound correct?
Yep, that's correct. Yep. Absolutely, makes total sense.
So in that process, I think it's a powerful perspective. The other piece that you have highlighted here is transparency, and beyond the security mindfulness, the DoD is not naturally transparent in all its parts. What has been your perspective around being transparent when we're talking about vulnerabilities and potentially mission critical systems here? How do you balance transparency with secrecy, I guess, of some sensitive information?
Yeah, and the issue with obfuscation or secrecy, like you said, is a false sense of security, right? You think you're secure, but you don't really know. And look, we have to know, right? And so when we put some of our systems at DEF CON, and it took 3 minutes for white hats to get into the system as root, it was pretty clear that it wasn't good enough. I argued that by open sourcing some of the DevSecOps pieces and using some of the work with the Cloud Native Computing Foundation in Kubernetes and containers and all the suite of products around it, and that kind of transparency and open sourcing this back and having more federal agencies outside of DoD use it, more organizations. We have healthcare, finance organizations, and a broader adoption by contractors that sell capabilities to the department. Effectively, we become more secure because you have more eyes on code, but you also opening the risk of other nations that are less friendly to look at what we're doing and have insights as far as what how we're doing it. But we also make it more secure. So there's pros and cons, and we think open sourcing that basic layer of automation and abstraction with Kubernetes and containers and DevSecOps and CI/CD pipeline and will really ultimately make it more widely adopted outside of DoD, which will make it more secure, create a community around it with more people contributing back. We have dozens of commercial organizations that announced they're putting full-time engineers on our open source repo. Lockheed Martin is putting 6 people, Cisco 2. I mean, it's endless how many organizations are looking at putting people full-time on that open source work. That is a first for the government to have that kind of engagement at scale with commercial organizations. And it's because they can also make money by reselling and adding services on top of what we open source. And so effectively, I think it's a win-win, right? But, we have to be more comfortable living in a world where, look, people will find it. And let's face it, that false sense of security doesn't exist once the system is in production because, if they manage to get any foothold on the network in any kind of way, they're going to be able to get access to those systems pretty quickly, no matter what we think of perimeter security, which is completely outdated. And so that's where Zero Trust and all the stack we're building and that behavioral detection will help proactively detect these things instead of taking months to even know bad actors are inside of the network.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. Very well said. I love this notion of commercial companies coming along and putting people on it. In part, clearly, it's a benefit and maybe some public service that they're sort of helping improve a government capability. But also, I think a lot of these organizations, it's in their benefit given the federal government, the DoD's buying power. It's in their benefit to actually help the DoD advance some practices if they're looking to sell service that might be most beneficial in that more modern surrounding. So it's really nice to sort of see the way to sort of harness, I guess, the power of and the needs, the agenda, if you will, of the commercial entities in favor of strengthening the actual security and capabilities of the platform for it. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah, the other benefit of that is the companies, sure, they want to make money, and that's the point of any company on the planet. They will also now contribute back and make it better and stronger and faster together. but also it's less risk of getting locked into one vendor for the department and the taxpayer, because now it's part of that open tools landscape. And so effectively, we mitigated a lot of different things. We improved security. We mitigated the risk of vendor lock-in. We made companies contribute to a single code base. If you look at SpaceX, 80% of the code is shared across their 9 platforms. And in DoD, not even 5% of code is shared between our jets, for example. So we effectively paid to rewrite code that could have been reused day one. And so we want to improve that. And so by open sourcing and moving to these Lego blocks microservice capabilities, we can effectively start accrediting microservices centrally, make them available across DoD, and have that reused across the department and streamlining that process. That's a game-changing aspect too. And we have over 2,000 microservices that were built in 6 months. And now organizations that used to sell monolithic systems can cut it and bring to us containers so they can get accredited on Iron Bank. And we have a process for any organization that want to sell to DoD, even startup that never did any business with DoD, to be able to be onboarded within 2 to 4 weeks on Iron Bank, to be accredited and consumed as a container, as a Lego block. That's game changing also to extend the outreach to smaller companies, startups, so we can benefit of best of breed and innovations all across.
Excellent. Yeah. And all makes perfect sense. And, very forward thinking here. So loving that for sure. So I have 2 more kind of core questions here for you. I guess not committing to not asking a third one at the end of that. So let's talk about skills a sec. We talk about a different technology stack. We talk about a different approach here. How did you think about the talents required amidst the team? You talk about how both infrastructure as code and security as code are treated in software and go through the rigorous software development processes, including all these different steps. That's a different skill set than maybe a more sysadmin background security person coming along. How do you think and how did you approach the delta in talents required or skills required amidst across the DoD to implement this new approach?
Well, that's obviously a giant lift, and that's why I think continuous learning is foundational, because even if you get the best talent today, if you don't give them, and we give an hour a day at Platform One for people to learn, if you don't give them that kind of time and you don't invest in your people, you're making them stale and get behind, effectively running your own talent. So, of course, you need diversity of talent. We have, site reliability engineers and all these new fancy titles around, Kubernetes, Day 2, and cyber, and container security, and understanding zero trust and how to enforce it and what does that actually mean, because most people think they know what it means, but they don't. We have curriculums, we have self-learning capabilities. We give access to a learning hub where we have curated unbiased content from Linux Foundation, CNCF, and O'Reilly, the books that we created. And then, of course, the Cloud Sandbox to put it to good use so they can learn and continuously learn. So it's not just about getting talent that already have that knowledge, but I find, honestly, the best people are people that can learn and self-learn because of the pace of IT anyway. Quite honestly, I mean, I'm not just saying that because I didn't go to school. Don't get me wrong. I don't have a degree other than high school diploma, I guess. That doesn't count, I guess. So I obviously...
Here, so you're in a
yeah, I mean... We can obviously learn fast, and I think that's foundational, because if you look at the landscape we're talking about, even stuff like Service Mesh that didn't exist 3 years ago are now foundational to our zero trust architecture, and things like Istio and Envoy, the reverse proxy. So effectively, I think it's about learning and not just skills. Skills will change and move, and technology will change, and so that it's all about continuous learning. And how do you empower your people to learn?
Yeah, no, that's a great insight. It's not about the reskilling; it's about embedding a competency of learning, because it always changes. I guess on that note, if I can ask, what's an example or 2 of mistakes you've done in earlier iterations of this? These are very sharp answers. I'm sure it wasn't all out of the box perfected. Take us a bit along the journey. What's an example of something that you've tried, you thought it was a good idea, and you backed out of, or you've considered and you backed out of?
Yeah, I think that the biggest mistakes I made were due to the fact that I was dropped in the DoD with no background of the department, the military, the bureaucracy, the silos, how the system works. And so you get a commercial guy in there, and it's like you're talking a different language. You don't even understand how the system works and how to get things done. I was always a little struggling when it came to engaging the leadership to get their buy-in faster. And I was trying to show that sense of urgency. And, I was doing this for our kids so we can be a stronger nation. But at the same time, those people have been there for years. They understand the system, and they didn't always see that urgency. And so it was frustrating for me. And, I kind of cut corners or try to push things to happen maybe faster than I should have. So it was more about the culture shift and getting the momentum started. Once I got the trust and started to deliver and show that, hey, the French guy is going to be able to actually get stuff done and not just talk about stuff all day, I think that's where I started to get a little bit more buy-in from people, and then you have a momentum going. But I wish I spent a little bit more time trying to understand the system and why those silos exist and who does what and who is leading what, instead of just showing up and be like, yeah, you're doing everything wrong. We need to cut the silos. We need to shift left. We need to rethink security versus compliance. We need to automate. And people were always freaking out. We were trying to remove humans in the loop. We're trying to trust automation when, nuclear surety or airworthiness is foundational. So I think that was my biggest mistake is how to bring people from a complete diverse background outside of IT alongside of what we were trying to do. And once I got the gist of it, it got easier. But I think what the department is not doing very good is we have a process to bring people like me in, and it's a very annoying and complex nightmare, including having to divest stock and potentially lose a lot of money on top of the pay cut you're taking on your paycheck for conflict of interest. Since you're going to be managing a lot of money, you can't have stock in companies and stuff that could potentially benefit, right? So there is no process to train people on, hey, here's DoD 101, how the bureaucracy, the Pentagon, the building works, right? That, I think, is a big issue if we want to bring more people from industry into the department. So, but that's probably the biggest mistake I made. The tech stuff, I think we got right 99% of the time. I don't have a big story that comes to mind, other than, I guess, we need diversity in execution. So instead of awarding contract to a single company to execute that vision of DevSecOps, we ended up shifting to 36 companies and cutting the work into value streams and mixing teams together to bring more options. That's probably one of the lessons learned. But again, it's more acquisition related and contracts than it is about the technology vision.
Yeah, no, but still good learning here as well. Thanks for sharing that. And it's hard. People are always the hardest bit. I guess I have a different closing question for the podcast this year. Listeners may know, but I actually feel the one I was using in the previous years is fitting here. If you think about a team in your shoes, in a company, maybe not quite a large scale, a Fortune 100 company or other large scale organization, not quite running the Air Force or DoD, if you want to give them one bit of advice, one key focus or do or don't, trying to implement, this type of DevSecOps transformation, what would that be?
Organizations will be as successful as their people. So continuous learning, invest in continuous learning, give people time. And I would go as far as an hour a day for people to learn, paid. And then build these enterprise services to remove the impediments. And I can tell you, if I was still an investor with my VC, I would look at companies not about just their product and people, but also look at their maturity in DevSecOps and how capable that team is to allow the team to learn and move fast and move at the pace of relevance and adjust based on that learning. It's all about timeliness. And so if you don't have a strong investment in DevSecOps and not just DevOps with that baked-in security, zero trust, service mesh, cloud agnosticity, so you're not locked into a single cloud provider, you're you're not building software the way you should be built in 2021.
Yeah, well, that's a a good advice and encouragement here. Thanks for that one. Hey, so one parting question that is my regular question here in the podcast. All of this is, present and getting ready for the future. If you take out your crystal ball and you look at it and you say, a person in your seat trying to do what you're trying to do now, but in 5 years' time, what would you say is the biggest change?
That's a good question. I think cybersecurity is going to evolve, and I think it's going to be a lot about that continuous monitoring capability. And I think that the big risk is the dependencies of the product you use that you don't know much about. And so on the cyber side, I think my biggest fear is the follow-up of the SolarWinds breach and that risk of supply chain, and paying attention to your bill of material, paying attention to how you control your updating, CI/CD capability, multi-party signing, multiple set of eyes on code change. It's all going to be about automation in GitOps and multiple set of eyes on code to approve that change, so not one person can make a change that could be malicious in nature. And really that supply chain management, I think that's going to be the big risk in the next 2 to 5 years. Past 5 years, tough. I think it's going to be a lot about AI. We're spending a lot of time on Kubeflow and AI machine learning, deep learning capabilities. I think obviously that's going to be a way to automate and scale, including in cyber risk and scanning capabilities. But beyond that, I think that's probably too far away right now.
Yeah, it's hard. We're getting out of the agile mode. But thanks for that perspective. Hey, Nicolas, this has been great. Time flew here. We're going for quite a while. I'm sure you've got wisdom to share here for a full day more. But thanks for coming on the show and sharing your wisdom with us here and your experience. And congrats on this super kind of impressive program here that you're driving forward.
No, thanks for having me.
And thanks everybody for tuning in. And I hope you join us for the next one.
Thanks for listening to The Secure Developer. That's all we have time for today. To find additional episodes and full transcriptions, visit thesecuredeveloper.com. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or get involved in the community, find us on Twitter at @DevSecOps. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes if you enjoyed today's episode. Bye for now.